chapter 6, verses 12 through 19. And before I read this section of the scripture, I just want to put it in context a little bit. Just before this, Jesus has been teaching alongside the apostles and gets scolded for healing and teaching on the Sabbath. Right, so there's this discussion between him and the Pharisees about what is lawful or unlawful to do on the Sabbath. Then we're going to get this piece of scripture, and then right after it comes the Beatitudes, the very famous passage from Jesus of blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom. Blessed are those who hunger, that long list of blessings and woes. In between those two, we get this scripture. On one of those days, Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray and spent the night alone praying to God. When morning came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them, whom he also designated apostles. Simon, whom he named Peter, his brother Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, Simon, who was called the Zealot, Judas, son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. He went down with them and stood on a level place. A large crowd of his disciples were there, and a great number of people from all over Judea, from all of Jerusalem, and from the coastal region around Tyre and Sidon. All who had come to hear him came to be healed of their diseases. Those troubled by impure spirits were cured, and the people all tried to touch him, as power was coming from him and healing each one of them. Spirit of God has been present in the reading and hearing of these words. Thanks be to God. So again, the context of this scripture, right? A conversation about the Sabbath has happened just before. The blessings and woes, the Beatitudes happen right after. And in the middle, we get this scripture where Jesus chooses a few of the disciples to be his apostles, also known as the 12. And then there is a lot of healing that takes place. But before these two major acts, we get that piece where Jesus goes away to be alone with God. And as Brooke invited me to think about this spiritual practice of silence and time away, one of the challenges was figuring out which passage to choose, because Jesus goes away to pray so often. Over and over again, he takes this time away from the crowd to say, I am going to be alone with God. We don't often get the narrative of what happens between Jesus and God the Father in those moments. We don't often get that discussion, which I wish we did, right? I wish we got some of his wrestlings. I wish we knew more of what he wrestled with God. But instead, we just know that he goes away to pray. Sometimes he names it as a need for rest. Sometimes Jesus names it as a need for prayer. But often, Jesus goes away. Oftentimes, others try to come with him. And sometimes he lets others, right? We think about there are a few times where a few disciples go away with him, right? One of them that sticks out to me is when a few of them go and they want to stay on the mountain because they have seen the church leaders from the past, and they have experienced this mountaintop moment, and they say, we want to stay up here. Do we really have to go back? Right? Sometimes others come with him, but often Jesus is by himself. And I don't think I understood the magnitude of that until a few years ago. In the summer of 2019, I was discerning this move back to Wilmington. I originally grew up in Newark and then had moved to Detroit, Michigan, and then to Washington, D.C., and I was really happy at the church I was serving outside of D.C. I thought I was going to stay there at least through grad school when this opportunity came to co-lead Riverfront Church with Edwin Estevez, who was the founding pastor. That summer was filled with a lot of questions, and that summer I walked a lot by myself. But I was walking with a purpose. You see, I had planned this trip to Spain and Portugal to hike a section of the Camino de Santiago. This pilgrimage that goes, there's a route that goes from France to Spain and then a route that goes from Portugal to Spain. All ending in Santiago de Compostela in Spain. Originally, I was going to take this trip with a couple of friends, but that spring, both friends pulled out for different reasons. And at the end of April, I was tasked with, do I go or do I stay? And I ended up deciding to go on this 2-week-long journey completely by myself. It was the best thing that I have ever done for myself. This 2-week journey, 200 miles, averaging about 15 a day, was really hard physically, and yet emotionally and spiritually, it was this time of silence that I had never experienced before. I had prepared for this silence with downloading a lot of music and podcasts and audiobooks. I am an extrovert. I'm an external processor, and so I didn't really think I was going to be in silence. I thought I was just going to go on a great walk. But what I found after that first day, which I finished, Michelle Obama's Becoming, I finished that audiobook, and with that, I decided I didn't need any more books. My body, my soul had settled into this rhythm of walking and of silence in a way that it never had before. I then found for the next 13 days, I started my day with those 5 songs that I mentioned earlier in this service, and then I was just silent, open to what the day ahead of me would unfurl with. Sometimes that meant walking with others who I met along the path, right? I was open to talking if that came, but I wasn't forcing it. I wasn't necessarily looking for it. I, for the first time in my life, found this peace in the silence and the peace with myself. A new reality. That I didn't have to be helping anyone else, that I didn't have to achieve anything, that I didn't have to accomplish a certain amount of tasks that day. All I needed to do was to pay attention to myself and what my body needed. Again, a new phenomenon. My time on the Camino helped me find this peace in the silence that I had never found before. This peace in time away. This peace that it was just me and God, and the rest of it would figure itself out. What I didn't know when I planned that journey was that I would say yes to this job when I was sitting in the airport of JFK on my way to the Camino. I got the call from Riverfront offering me the job sitting in JFK airport. And then I was able to get on a plane to process, to take this time apart. Now I know that we can't all go on the Camino de Santiago, though I encourage you to do so if that sounds good to you. But what I have found since returning home from the Camino is that if I want to, I can find these places in daily life. I can find these moments of silence and set apart time with God in my day to day. It is much harder now than it was on the Camino, right? I have to be really intentional about it, but it is possible. What I've also found is that this set apart time with God is different than our normal silence, right? Some of us, and myself included, sometimes go through many days without talking to other people, right? Some of us have more silence in our life than others. But this set apart time with God is intentional, right? Jesus went away to be with God. It wasn't just his internal thoughts. It was a set apart, different experience. That intentionality requires intention, right? It requires this movement towards God, towards the silence not just being quiet, but this silence being real time of prayer, real seeking, real reflection. Since I've returned from the Camino, my soul has yearned for that space more than any other. On the really hard days, I go for a walk. I try and find that space again. And again, it's a lot harder because day-to-day life is not just the Camino. But I've found that this set apart time of silence and time away with God has made a real difference. There's this peace in my spirit that did not exist 4 years ago. There is this desire for quiet and stillness that did not exist 4 years ago. There is this ability to reset and to rest in a way that did not exist 4 years ago. Right, on the Camino, I learned that I didn't have to earn rest, that I didn't have to earn silence, that I didn't have to earn this time away, but that as one created in the image of God, I could just claim it. And so I wonder what it would look like for you to take some time of silence and time away before you are on empty, right? We often work and are in our day-to-day life so passionately and so furiously that we go and we go and we go until we are on empty. And then it's when we're on empty that we say, all right, I'm going to take a break. Or sometimes our bodies force us to take a break, right? What would it look like to take that time before you are on empty? And where could these times of silence and set apartness be in your day-to-day life? Again, for me, it doesn't look like 4-hour, 5-hour long walks anymore. For me right now, it looks like that morning playlist, setting me into ideally like 10 minutes of silence. For me, it looks like an evening walk, at least a couple of times a week. For me, it looks like giving myself permission to take a rest in the middle of the day. But it's taken work. It's taken work to put it into my routine. But for me, and I think for others, those places of sanctuary are so necessary, right? Jesus needed time apart. And I believe we do as well. As we reflect on this scripture and this theme together, I wonder what is bubbling up for you this day.
I feel like when you set apart yourself like with God, I feel like with my experience, I feel like that hits very close to home because for a long time I felt like very lost of what I was supposed to do. Like I felt very stressed, very depressed, filled with a lot of anxiety. But sometimes you just need to take time from yourself for you to process all of these things, and you don't have to just earn just to be like to be rested or just to take a break. But it's just good to take a break from everything for a while. So I just feel like that really just hit close to home for me. But
Thank you.
I just found it really neat how that concept also ties into mental health related things. Because when I was a teenager, something that my psychiatrist drilled into me, but it still took me years to actually apply, was the idea of needing to take an hour just to yourself, engaging in something that is relaxing for both your body and your mind, that's not related to your work or like super strenuous, and is just silent time. And I just found it really neat how the two of those like tie together so lovely.
Well, thank you, Chelsea. It was good having you here this morning, and thanks for your message. And I just would dream about being able to take a walk like that. When I was a kid, I used to withdraw into books. I loved to read, and as I grew up, I got busy with sports, and then I had boyfriends, and then I had a career, and then I got married and had kids, and life interfered with my books and my time for myself. But in the last 4 or 5 years, I've returned to reading, and I read all the time, lots and lots and lots of books. But lately, I've been turning off the TV, putting the books down, and just sitting in silence, talking to the Lord about everything. And I have found that to be a real gift, a real gift of being able to just do nothing but sit and talk to God about what's going on in the world, what's going on with my family, what is happening with my neighbors, my church. It doesn't matter what it is. It's just talking to God, and so I'm blessed. That's all I can say. I'm blessed that I have that time today to be able to do that, and most people don't have that time. And to be intentional about it, it's very difficult when you're young, raising kids and having a career. But it's worth it if you can just take a little time.
David on Zoom said I went to a few largely silent Quaker meetings when I was in college and found them to be really helpful. That's Allison. Thank you. I appreciate you.
What are some other ways that y'all find silence or rest in the midst of the busy?
Thank you for that wonderful message. It's a great reminder because life goes by so fast. And I got an image of when a plane is crashing and they tell the moms, grab your mask first because you have to be alive to help others. And it's like being a mom, you're so crazy busy doing everything, and you have to fill your own jar before you can, before it runs out on empty because you have to care for all these other people. But I'm alone now every day. I eat alone, sleep alone, do everything alone, shop alone. And the silence sometimes is deafening. But I recently got into painting, and I find that very peaceful and calming. And when I'm grabbing for the paintbrush, I can just let my mind wander and talk to God. And and say, I don't know who's going to want this painting, but the process doesn't, not at the end, but it's what I'm going through at the time that's giving me this peace to put everything else aside. And yeah, it gives me that solemn time with him. So again, thank you. That was very moving.
Yeah, I think sometimes we often equate silence with like being really still and meditation, that like it doesn't involve movement, right? And yet I think sometimes it can involve movement if that is what you need, And so that piece of painting and like the movement of your hands and your body doing an action while your mind can wander, or for me, it's much of what a walk gets, right? That my body is moving and processing in a way that allows my spirit to also wander and not necessarily be as restless.
I was just thinking about my friend Elaine, who is a swimmer, and how she used to talk about when she swam that she had more peace and more time for God than she did any other time during the day. But swimming was really a way of silence for her and communication.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like doing any small hobby that you enjoy is just a way to like find peace. Like with me, sometimes I do a little bit of art when I'm just bored and I'm just doing my own thing, since people are so busy with work, with their 9 to 5s and everything, with bills, taxes, everything. But just doing like small hobbies that you enjoy can just be something that you can take a break from, or it doesn't even have to be like a hobby. You can just take a walk, do exercising, but you know, just
Yeah, I think the midst of God in all things, right, and God in all places, and how are we experiencing God in the day to day, and then how are we again setting that intentional time apart as well, and even if I think sometimes it can be hard because it can look like the day to day, but if you are being intentional about it and you are thinking of it as set apart time, then it's set apart for you, right? If your spirit is in this moment of, this is a moment for me and God, it might look the same to people on the outside, but for you and God, it's different. So this next song is titled Be Still.